The cold had teeth that winter. Sharp, cruel teeth that bit through every layer Jacob wore like the memory of loss that chewed at his soul. He trudged through the thigh-deep snow, his camera swinging against his chest like a relic from another life. Just 2 weeks ago, he'd left the city, left behind the house that still smelled like her, and come to Alaska to vanish. Not forever, he told himself that, but long enough to drown in white silence. Long enough to let the world forget him. The blizzard wasn't supposed to hit until tomorrow. He glanced down at his GPS. The screen blinked weakly. No signal. Again. Great, he muttered, more to the wind than himself. Wind howled across the valley like a living thing. Trees groaned. Snow lifted from the ground in waves of white fury, and the clouds above seemed to descend, tightening their noose. He knew the trail, at least he thought he did, but the landscape had gone shapeless, swallowed by the storm. It wasn't just cold. It was hostile. This was nature with no mercy. He forced himself to keep moving, heart pounding under the layers. Every breath stung. Every minute passed like an hour. He thought of Mara, how she would have laughed at him heading into the middle of nowhere, how she'd hated the cold but loved hearing his stories about it. He had no one to tell stories to anymore. The first sign something was wrong came when he reached into his pack for an energy bar and found frozen mush instead. His water bottle had turned solid. The batteries for his backup beacon, dead. He cursed himself for not turning back this morning. He wasn't a fool. He just didn't care what happened to him anymore, until he saw it. The figure came through the snow like a ghost. Huge, lurching, misshapen. At first, Jacob thought it was a hallucination. A bear? Out in this blizzard? But then it came closer, and it was very real. A massive grizzly, its fur caked in snow, one front leg dragging behind it with a painful limp. The creature's head lowered, body swaying, its breaths visible in thick clouds. Jacob froze. He knew what to do. Slowly lower his body. Avoid eye contact. Stay still. Don't run. But his body screamed, "Run!" This thing could kill him in seconds. His hand trembled near the bear spray. He could see the deep pink scar running along its flank. It had been hurt. Badly. Then something happened that made his blood run colder than the wind ever could. The bear met his eyes, and stopped. It didn't charge, didn't growl, didn't even sniff the air. Instead, it stared. There was something intelligent in its eyes, something ancient and tired. Then, slowly, deliberately, it turned and limped away into the storm. Jacob stood frozen. He should run the other direction. He should find shelter, dig a snow trench, do anything but follow a wounded predator. But something about the look in that bear's eyes haunted him. Something that said, "Come." He didn't understand it. Maybe he didn't want to. But his feet moved anyway. One step, then another. He followed. The bear limped ahead, glancing back every few minutes. Always just enough for Jacob to keep track of it through the swirling snow. It didn't make sense. Nothing about this did. But as the whiteout grew worse, he had no other choice. Minutes turned to an hour. Then, through the wall of white, something took shape. An old cabin. Its roof sagged under the weight of snow, and one side looked partially buried. The windows were frosted over, cracked with age. A chimney jutted out like a skeletal arm, long unused. The bear reached the structure and stopped, turning to face Jacob. Then it sat, right in front of the door. Jacob blinked. It was as if the bear had led him here. He stepped cautiously around the animal, careful not to startle it. The grizzly didn't move, just watched. Jacob tested the door. It groaned open on rusted hinges. Inside it was pitch dark and bitter cold, but sheltered. That alone made it worth everything. He closed the door behind him. The silence inside was thicker than the snow. Dust clung to every surface. A few broken chairs, a sagging cot, what looked like an ancient stove in the corner. It wasn't much, but it was a lifeline. Jacob dropped to his knees and tore through his pack for the fire-starting kit. Thank God he had one that still worked. 20 minutes later, a fire crackled in the old iron stove. The warmth crept outward like a miracle. Jacob sat on the floor, hands outstretched, eyes burning from wind and snow. Then he remembered the bear. He stood, walked to the frost-covered window, and wiped a circle clear with his glove. It was still there, sitting just outside the door, steam rising from its breath, watching. Its ears twitched as if it knew he was looking. Jacob stared back, stunned. The bear made no move to leave. In fact, it looked expectant. And again, something in its eyes, a glint of knowing, not animal instinct, something more, and then it grunted, softly, not a growl, not a threat, a low, mournful sound that almost sounded like a plea. Jacob backed away from the window, unsettled. Was it guarding him? Waiting? Or did it want something? His mind reeled. Nothing in nature explained this. He had no idea how to interpret what he was seeing, only that it wasn't normal. It wasn't just a bear. He moved to the center of the cabin and looked around again, this time more carefully. The furniture had been untouched for decades. The fireplace was scorched but not used in years. Dust was everywhere, except in one place. Right in the center of the floor, the dust had been disturbed. And there, barely visible, a faint seam in the wooden planks. Jacob knelt down. He brushed snow and dust aside and found a small rusted ring embedded into one of the floorboards. A hatch. He hesitated. The bear grunted again, louder this time. Jacob turned, heart thudding. The firelight flickered across the walls. He gripped the ring and pulled. The floor groaned, and then opened. The air that rushed out was stale, cold. Below was darkness. And then a sound, soft, barely audible, a whimper. Jacob's breath caught. He reached for his flashlight, clicked it on, and aimed it into the hole. There, at the bottom of a short wooden staircase, in a corner of what looked like a hidden cellar, something moved, a flash of motion, then again, the sound, a cry, small, human. Jacob's eyes widened. He stumbled back from the hatch, heart racing. The bear outside let out another guttural sound, this one louder, more urgent. Jacob stared at the open floor, then at the fire, then at the door. The truth slammed into him all at once. The bear hadn't just found him. It had brought him here, for a reason. And under the floor, a child was crying. Jacob stood at the edge of the open hatch, the heat of the fire behind him and the cold from below creeping up his spine. The faint whimpering rose again, weak, high-pitched, desperate. He aimed his flashlight down the wooden steps, eyes scanning every corner of the basement-like pit beneath the cabin. The grizzly outside the door let out another deep, rumbling grunt, as if urging him to move. He hesitated only a second longer before lowering himself into the darkness. The air grew warmer as he descended, unnaturally warm, like a generator, or vent was running somewhere. The light flickered across old beams, a dirt floor, rusted storage containers, and something more. On the far wall, a loose plank had been pulled aside, revealing a black void. A tunnel. He froze, trying to process what he was seeing. Someone, or something, had built beneath this cabin. The whimpering had stopped, but the warmth, the stale smell of fur and metal and mold, came from within that passage. Jacob's pulse thudded in his ears. He turned back and looked up the stairs. The firelight flickered warmly. Just beyond the front door, the bear still waited. Whatever lay ahead, he had to know. He dropped to his hands and knees and crawled into the tunnel. The crawl space narrowed and twisted. Every breath he took tasted of earth and mildew. And then, after a tight turn, the space opened into a room, or rather a bunker-like enclosure. Reinforced walls, steel shelves, broken machinery scattered like bones across the floor. A table upturned, Old lights hung from the ceiling, wires trailing like vines. He blinked in disbelief. This wasn't just a shelter, it was a lab. Jacob rose to his feet and slowly scanned the room. Feeding bowls, one oversized, one small. Chewed rubber toys, scattered papers. Then he saw the door, heavy, steel, bolted from the outside. Scratches clawed into its lower half, some shallow, others deep enough to curl the metal. Jacob stepped closer. The scratches weren't random. They formed shapes, letters almost, as if something had tried to write. He swallowed hard and turned away, his flashlight catching a stack of worn notebooks lying half-buried under a collapsed shelf. He knelt and opened one. The handwriting was jagged, rushed. Subject 41X demonstrates remarkable pattern recognition. Responds to signed gestures. Emotional reactions mirror human child at age 4 to 5. Further studies approved. He flipped to the next page. Communication across species barrier progressing. 41X shows protectiveness over infant subjects. Trial number 7 successful. Can identify danger and initiate aid behavior. We're witnessing something historic. Jacob's hands shook as he turned page after page. Photos were clipped to the back of the journals. Black and white shots of a young bear cub in a sterile enclosure playing with blocks. Sitting with a researcher. Touching hands through plexiglass. In the margins, cognitive capacity well beyond baseline. Emotional intelligence unquantifiable. We have created empathy where nature gave none. Then the tone shifted. The ink became more frantic, smudged, angry. Funding pulled. They don't want the truth getting out. Ordered to euthanize all test subjects. We can't. He understands. He knows. Jacob's breath hitched. His eyes jumped to the last entry. We faked the shutdown, hid what we could. If you're reading this, know that 41X survived. He protected the child. We weren't supposed to go this far, but God help us, we did. A muffled clang echoed behind the steel door. Jacob's head snapped up. The sound came again, a shuffling, a soft, raspy breath, and then a faint, broken cry. He moved toward the door, his flashlight beam jittering with his nerves. The bolt was rusted but still functional. With effort, he wrenched it free and pulled the door open slowly. What he saw inside knocked the wind from him. The room looked like a nursery, if one had been left to rot underground for years. Cracked tiles lined the walls, a toppled crib, torn blankets, molded teddy bears, and gnawed wooden toys. But despite the decay, signs of recent life were everywhere. Scattered food wrappers, melted snow pooled on the ground, and disturbed bedding tucked in the corner. And nestled within it all, trembling and barely breathing, was a bear cub. Tiny, weak. Its ribs showed through its fur. One paw looked swollen, as if injured. It lifted its head at the sound of Jacob's footsteps, but didn't growl or run. Its dark eyes, so eerily expressive, locked onto his. There was recognition in them. Jacob took a cautious step forward. The cub whimpered, not in fear, but as if asking for something. Warmth. Help. Him. He knelt beside it, heart pounding. Gently he reached out, unsure what he was doing or what this meant. But the cub didn't pull away. Instead, it pressed its face weakly into his palm. It was like touching a frightened child. A noise above. The bear. Jacob looked toward the hatch, then back at the cub. It couldn't have gotten down here on its own. Was this what the older bear had been guarding? Not itself. Not the cabin. This cub. Was it possible? He scooped the cub up in his jacket, cradling it like a newborn. It weighed next to nothing. He could feel the heat of its tiny body burning up with fever. He turned and began retracing his steps, back through the tunnel, up the stairs, heart thudding louder with every step. As he emerged into the cabin, the firelight washed over him. Snow howled outside. He opened the door. The bear rose, its breath puffed in thick clouds, eyes locked on the bundle in Jacob's arms. and for a terrifying moment Jacob thought it might lunge. He stepped back, but the bear didn't move toward him. Instead, it lowered its massive body, as if bowing, and let out a low, broken sound, almost like relief, almost like gratitude. Jacob stood there, stunned. The pieces slid into place. This wasn't just a mother bear.